Hello again, this is Dr. Joel Shertok, President of Process Industries Consultants, a chemical engineering consultancy located in Newark, Delaware. So the last couple of broadcasts, we have discussed the hard science of chemical engineering. We've discussed the price of nonconformance, which is a way of tracking inefficiencies in a chemical plant. We've tracked reaction engineering, which is the way that a product is made by mixing raw materials and reacting them. And we've discussed a little bit on recovery and purification. Today, I'd like to talk a little bit about the guilty secrets of any chemical engineering operation, and that's the people. Engineers don't like to talk about people that much because that's a soft skill. And many chemical engineers, in fact, many engineers in general, are not all that comfortable dealing with soft skills. That's why you won't find many engineers in networking meetings. You won't find many engineers milling around talking. It's not necessarily a skill that they have. And of course, if you speak to an engineer, they'll tell you that if I wanted to network and deal with people, I'd be in marketing and sales and not engineering. However, like it or not, if you are in a corporation or even a consultant working for yourself, the people component is incredibly, incredibly important. I've seen careers ruined by engineers who were incredibly competent technically and had no people skills. And of course, they all know the stereotype computer hacker working in his basement at 2 o'clock in the morning, trying to avoid people as much as possible. Maybe you can do that, but if you're working in a corporate environment, you probably will not get away with that. So let's talk about the soft skills. Let's talk about the challenges you will face as an engineer dealing with quote-unquote people. So let's go back to the Fortune 500 companies that I worked for before I became a consultant. And most corporations, although it's faded out somewhat these days, have had a pretty rigid caste system. Almost like the Hindu religion, people in a specific caste. So there were 3 separate castes. There was the management caste, in which the executive caste was sort of a subset. There was the technical engineer caste. At the very bottom was the technician caste. And depending on the company, these are somewhat loose or somewhat rigid. When I began working, mid-70s, early 80s, they were extremely rigid. Technicians kept in their caste, engineers kept in their caste, and managers tend to keep in their caste. And of course, the executives were somewhere, in their corner office in a world of their own. It was important for the engineers to be able to relate to the technicians because typically the techs were the ones who actually did your work. You were in your office and you were pondering, kinetics or separations and things of that nature. But the experiments that you designed that your work would depend on, they were done by technicians. And they had a much different orientation than the engineers. Typically, technicians were not promoted into the engineering ranks unless they went back to school and got their engineering degree. So that while engineers kind of came and went, the techs tended to stay. So that made them the repository of an awful lot of cultural knowledge in the company, because chances are a senior executive in the company at one time worked with a technician. A technician knew all the mistakes that he made and all the errors that he made and all the things that he had done when he was just an ordinary human being. And they were pretty verbal about their observations. It was interesting to hear, but their orientation was much, much different. They had separate break rooms. Engineers had their offices. Techs didn't have offices as a rule, they had break rooms. And typically the break rooms had drawings and cartoons and posters. And what struck me is while the engineers were pretty optimistic about their prospects, the technicians' break room had cartoons that were incredibly bleak, very pessimistic, things going wrong, all the things that they felt that the engineers foisted upon them. And of course, they kept it more or less to themselves, since that would not be welcomed if they verbalized them. But I was always impressed by just how bleak the cartoons were in the technicians' break room. So you, as an engineer, even today, where the cases are not that rigid as they were, you have to work with techs. They're the ones, in many respects, your career depends on your relationship with your technician. They are the ones that create the data that your career depends on. A good technician will understand what you want, even if you kind of mess up telling him, will give you the data that you need, will give you the success that you need, and will give you the promotions that you need. So it is well worth your while to cultivate the best possible relationship with your technician. And understand that his perspective is not your perspective. As an engineer, you're pretty well compensated. As a technician, probably not. I joked one time. I went to my Goodyear place for my car. I got hit with a $500 repair bill. Now, lots of things have gone wrong. I mentioned to my boss and my colleagues, no, I don't understand how techs on their salary could afford a $500 car bill. And the answer is they can't. They can't. But by the same token, they don't take their cars to Goodyear. They do the repairs themselves, or they have friends who are mechanics and will do the job for, maybe a piece of lunch or something like that. And sure enough, one day I work out in the YMCA where I live, walking to the YMCA, and at the curb were two cars. One car had been fully taken apart, and the other car was full of parts and boxes and things like that. The car that was being repaired was surrounded by about 4 or 5 people. They were all manning different tools and taking things apart and putting things back together again. Obviously, this guy had arranged for his friends who were mechanically gifted. They took his car, parked it by the curb out of everybody's way, and were doing repairs. In Goodyear, that would cost $500-600. With friends, it was probably a pizza lunch. That's what it means. That's how these guys survive. So their perspective is much, much different than yours. You have prospects. They may have prospects, maybe not. Also, techs were very jealous of their caste, if you will. They're proud of being technicians. They're proud of the value they brought to the company, even if they thought they weren't appreciated. And God help you if you, as a technician, put on false airs. There was one technician who was in a group when I was with Union Carbide. He was going back to school to get his engineering degree, which is a perfectly fair thing to do. It took forever, comparatively speaking, but he saw no future as a tech, and he wanted to be an engineer, which is precisely right. He got engaged, and the engagement announcement said that XYZ is an engineer with Union Carbide. And that caused a ruckus that was absolutely unbelievable. He was pretty much ostracized from the technician ranks for months. The punishment was amazing because from the tech's perspective, he was putting on airs. He was not an engineer yet. He would not be an engineer until he got his degree in many years. He was still a technician. And by pretending to be an engineer, he had crossed some invisible line. So these are the cultural things that you're not going to find covered in any HR manual, but they exist, and you have to be aware of that. When I did plant trials, who do you depend on to make your plant trial a success? The operators in a plant. Now, the operators have horizons even more limited than the technician in R&D. Typically, the technician in R&D probably have an associate's degree. Now, these days, that's almost mandatory. But if you're an operator in a chemical plant, you maybe have an associate's degree, but more likely you have a high school degree. And if the life of tech was somewhat bleak, the life of an operator is even bleaker. They work shift. They get all the dirty jobs to do. They've got to put with engineers who may or may not understand their process. And it gives them they develop a certain degree of dubiousness about these guys coming in from outside and doing plant trials. To make your plant trial a success, you have to work closely with these operators. And again, they're not part of your organization. You're coming out of R&D, or you're coming out of corporate engineering. You're going to come, you're going to go. The operators are still going to be there day in and day in and day out and day in. You've got to get them to help you because you're dependent on them. And I found that you have some operators who are fantastic. They understand what you're doing. They understand what you want. You can go to sleep at night. Rest assured that when you come back in the morning, everything's under control. There are operators who couldn't care less about you, and you will come back in the morning and find everything out of control. Nothing was done the way you wanted. And if you try and assign blame or try and ask what happened, they just look at you blankly. And there's nothing you can do. There is nothing you can do because if you complain to the shift super and he berates the operators, you'll get even less cooperation. So what do? I found in my background that the best way to win operator loyalty is for appreciate what they do, compliment them on their skills, and more importantly, bring them food. Nothing is more appreciated by an operating staff than somebody bringing them Dunkin' Donuts or Krispy Kremes, whatever they've eaten that area. Bring 2 dozen, enough for everybody, and they will love you because you're taking notice of them. And besides, they're hungry. It's good to give them something to eat. I did a lot of work down in Taft, Louisiana. Carbide had a big petrochemical plant down there. Did a bunch of plant trials. We made sure that if we were going in the morning, we bought 5 pounds of crawdads. We'd stop off at the seafood place, get 5 pounds of crawdads, crayfish. They loved us for that. Man, they were the happiest guys in the world. Occasionally buy them pizza. It's, don't charge to the company, pay for it out of your own pocket. That's appreciated even more. It's, $25 feeds a shift, not that much out of your pocket, and they will love you. Again, you have to acknowledge them as people. People have needs, people have ambitions, and you have to play to that. If you come in as all-powerful, mighty engineer, you will get horrible results, and they'll just look at you blankly when you say what happened. You will not find this in any HR manual. You will not find this written down anywhere. You won't even find that acknowledged. But rest assured, it exists. So again, chemical engineering. You can do your designs. You can do your calculations. You can plan your trials. You can plan your experiments to the nth degree. You have to work with people whose outlook is different than yours, people who have different motivations than yours. If you understand where they're coming from, understand what they enjoy, understand what they appreciate, you'll do very well for yourself. If you don't, you'll rack up horrible failures. One other thing, for engineers, you have to understand that as a professional technical person, you're under observation all the time. Corporations don't have a lot of tolerance, even today, for behavior that they regard as outside the norm. Certainly, if you're a management candidate, the company is going to take an awful risk that you can manage people. The company's going to be taking an awful risk that you can behave yourself under different circumstances. So when I started working, I was mentored by a more experienced technical guy. He was a couple of grades above me, but not yet a manager. And he was considered really promising management material. He was regarded as a comer. He had done some great technical work. And he was given me to kind of manage as an experiment, if you will. And he did good things. We got along just fine. And he was tapped to lead a delegation to Russia to try a new polyethylene catalyst. Now, that really is a major responsibility. And back days, Russia was a communist country, so even more critical. So we had a Christmas party, maybe about a month before he was going to go, and he got absolutely smashed. I mean, not happily buzzed, which is considered kind of a okay thing, although not so much today, but he got absolutely smashed to the point we had to be kind of taken home. And that made management very, very nervous because they said, okay, is this guy going to go to Russia and get smashed on vodka and and hurt Union Carbide or hurt our company or hurt people. And his career never recovered. I mean, it was that serious that people looked at him in a whole new light, and he was made a manager. He lasted about 6 months, and he was removed. He was put back on the technical ladder, which was, if you aspire to a management career and you're put back on a technical ladder, that's basically a kiss of death. You'll get one more technical promotion maybe in your career, and that will be it. You'll have a black mark against you. So understand that as a technical person, yes, you do technical work, but management's looking at you and saying, okay, how is this guy going to respond under pressure? Can he handle it? Will he do something stupid? Will he say something insulting? It's a crapshoot, and management is incredibly, incredibly careful and incredibly, incredibly observant about how you behave. So the purpose of this particular module is to kind of get away from the mere technical stuff, which in a sense is easy. I mean, calculations are calculations, and right is right and wrong is wrong. The sphere of human relations is much, much trickier. People occupy a spectrum of behaviors. You occupy a spectrum of behaviors. Your manager has a spectrum of behaviors. You have to understand where their motivations are. You have to understand what turns them on. You have to understand what the weak points are, what the strong points are. Again, I had one boss, Ukrainian. He was one of those interesting people you sometimes run into. He crossed into Nazi Germany from the Ukraine in the mid-1930s, was in the Wehrmacht during World War II, and eventually made it to Union Carbide, where he became a manager. And to say that he had a unique take on life is to put it mildly. He had different experiences, but in a sense, he was incredibly fair. He was totally non-political. His motivation was technical excellence and technical excellence only. And if you had a meeting with him, it was either all morning or all afternoon, before lunch or after lunch. But he could teach you an awful lot about chemical engineering. He started off as an operator, got his degrees, became a professional engineer, became a manager. So if you could stand the whippings, you came out a much better chemical engineer. But you had to understand his motivations. You are not going to fight him. You are not going to win. You understood what his background was. You understood what he demanded. And you gave it to him. If you wanted technical excellence, it meant that you did not go into a meeting with him unless your technical background was totally, totally bulletproof. Because even if it was, he was going to fight you, just to make sure that you really understood what you were talking about. And if you went to a plant trial, it was going to be successful. He was probably my most challenging boss, but also the one who taught me the most about chemical engineering. So again, consider the human component, people. It's probably the most important part of your job. Again, Dr. Joel Shertok, President Industry Consultants, operating out of Newark, Delaware. If you have any questions or comments, please send them to J. Shertok, J-S-H-E-R-T-O-K, at processindconsultants.com. And please check out my website, www.processindconsultants.com. Thank you much.